while my 8-month-old baby burned through a life-threatening 104 degrees Fahrenheit fever and fought to breathe in my arms. My husband walked into the ER and chose his mistress's healthy child over his dying son, killing our marriage in a single, unforgivable choice, the sterile, icy fluorescent light of the suburban Seattle ER bleached every color from the room, turning my panic cold and sharp, casting harsh shadows over every exhausted, worried face around me. The air smelled of antiseptic and worn carpet, thick with the quiet stress of people waiting for test results, symptom relief, and answers. Leo's small body was limp and scalding against my chest, his breath shallow and uneven, his chapped, dry lips barely parting for faint, exhausted whimpers that barely cut through the clinic's low hum. He hadn't kept down a single sip of water or formula in hours. His tiny cheeks sunken and pale, his usual bright, curious eyes half-lidded and glassy. Every visible sign pointing to rapid, dangerous deterioration. The triage nurse had pulled me aside minutes earlier, her professional tone edged with unmissable urgency: severe dehydration, spiking fever, heightened risk of febrile seizure and organ strain. My 8-month-old infant was in critical condition, in desperate need of immediate fluids and urgent pediatric intervention to stabilize his failing vitals before his condition spiraled further. I dialed Declan the second Leo's temperature exploded past 102 degrees Fahrenheit, voice shaking, tears already spilling, begging him to drop every work obligation and rush to my side. He'd promised he was minutes away, soothing me with quick, reassuring texts to calm my panic, claiming he was already on the hospital's parking lot. 40 agonizing, endless minutes had dragged by, and still, there was no sign of him, no update, no rushed apology, nothing. The waiting room hummed with restless, low chaos that only amplified my growing terror. Overhead pagers chirped faintly in the background, distant patients coughed weakly. Vending machines rumbled and clicked, and tired, anxious families shifted uncomfortably on hard plastic seating, all waiting their turn for care with quiet patience. I sat rigid on my chair, one palm pressed firmly to Leo's burning forehead to gauge his unrelenting heat, the other clutching my silent phone, refreshing our message thread over and over, waiting for a text, a call, any proof that my husband cared about our suffering child. Part of me kept making excuses for him, desperate to hold on to the life I'd built. For 7 years, I'd clung stubbornly to the illusion of our perfect suburban life. I'd excused Declan's endless late work nights, his vague, evasive explanations for missed dinners and cancelled family plans, his growing emotional distance that left me lonely long before tonight. I'd chosen to believe he was simply swamped with his real estate workload, that our stable home and sweet baby boy were his top priority. I'd ignored every small red flag, brushed off every quiet doubt, all to preserve the warm, intact family I'd fought so hard to build. I'd sacrificed my own social life and scaled back my design career to prioritize our household. Convinced our mutual dedication would keep us grounded forever, then the automatic glass doors slid open, and every single one of my self-soothing lies shattered instantly. Declan stepped into the ER first. Still dressed in his crisp work blazer, his movements quick and purposeful, but his urgency had nothing to do with our dying son. Right at his side, he tightly gripped the hand of 4-year-old Mason, Chloe Hale's young son. The toddler was fussy and sleepy, rubbing his eyes and dragging his feet, but he was completely unharmed. No hives, no swelling, no breathing issues, no symptoms of any medical emergency. Trailing casually behind them was Chloe, polished and calm, no trace of panic or urgency on her face. My blood turned icy in my veins. I watched, frozen in stunned horror, as Declan didn't spare me a single glance. He never looked at my tear-streaked face, never glanced down at the feverish, listless baby trembling in my arms. He walked straight past every waiting patient, zeroed in on the triage desk, and manufactured a desperate, panicked tone loud enough for the entire waiting room to hear. "My son's having a severe allergic reaction, he needs to be seen immediately." The lie hung thick in the hospital air, unmistakable and cruel. I knew the truth in that brutal second. There was no allergic reaction, no emergency, no crisis. It was a fake excuse, a calculated trick to skip the ER waiting line, all so he could prioritize his mistress and her healthy child while his own infant son teetered on the edge of medical danger. Declan had known exactly how sick Leo was. He'd read every frantic text, heard every shaky word in my panicked calls, seen the photos I'd sent of Leo's flushed, feverish face. He'd chosen them anyway. He'd chosen his secret affair over his family, his selfish comfort over his son's life. He'd driven across town to pick up Chloe and her child, prioritizing their minor inconvenience over the life of his own flesh and blood. And he'd done it without a single ounce of guilt or hesitation. Tears burned hot and sharp behind my eyes. But shock quickly melted into a ferocious, unshakable maternal rage. My whole body trembled, not from fear anymore, but from a simmering, righteous fury I'd never felt before. For years, I'd been the compliant, forgiving wife. I'd bent over backward to keep our marriage smooth, to overlook his flaws, to protect our family's perfect suburban image for friends, neighbors, and social media. I'd swallowed my loneliness during his endless absences, rationalized his cold detachment as grueling real estate work stress, and always put his peace of mind before my own crumbling happiness. I'd feared loneliness, feared single parenthood, feared breaking the stable, peaceful life we'd spent years building. I'd convinced myself that imperfect marriage was still better than broken family. But in that moment, every silly, gentle fear faded completely. The only thing I feared now was letting this selfish, dishonest man ever hold power over my child again. A quiet, brutal clarity settled over me. A man who would abandon his dying infant for his mistress would never change, never step up, never prioritize our family when temptation knocked. All my years of compromise and forgiveness had only enabled his betrayal. Letting him take my devotion and my son's safety for granted. As Declan leaned over the triage counter, chatting casually with the nurse and slowly filling out registration forms for Mason, even pausing mid-task to give Chloe a soft, quiet, reassuring smile, the exact tender look he hadn't given me in over a year. I adjusted Leo's fragile body securely in my arms. I pressed my cheek lightly to his burning forehead, whispering silent apologies to my baby for every time I'd chosen to trust the wrong man. My hands stopped shaking. My tears dried completely. Every ounce of heartbreak, confusion, and desperate longing for my old marriage turned into unbreakable, unwavering resolve. There was no going back after tonight. I stood slowly, my legs no longer weak with panic, my gaze fixed steady and sharp forward on the hospital's administrative station down the hallway. I knew exactly what I had to do next. No more pleading, no more excuses, no more waiting and hoping for a husband who had already proven he would never choose me or our son. I would no longer beg for loyalty from someone who'd already handed his heart and his priorities to another woman. Tonight, I was erasing Declan McKinney's legal medical guardianship rights over Leo. Tonight, I was cutting him out of my baby's life. One permanent, irreversible choice at a time. Our marriage was dead, killed not by a single mistake, but by months of hidden lies, selfish choices, and quiet betrayal I'd failed to notice. No longer would I let a disloyal man hold legal power over the health and safety of my child. I would handle every medical decision, every risk, every hard choice alone if I had to. I no longer craved his support, his apologies, or his empty promises of better days. The woman who'd spent 7 years begging for his love and attention was gone. In her place stood a mother with zero tolerance for betrayal, zero patience for excuses, and every intention of protecting my son from every person who dared to hurt him. Our marriage was dead. And I was finally ready to fight for my son, and for the new, honest, peaceful life we both deserved. I didn't wait for Declan to finish registering Mason before I walked away from the triage counter, my steps steady despite the hurricane of emotion swirling silently inside me. The second I stepped up to the hospital admin kiosk and submitted the digital form stripping Declan of all medical guardianship over Leo, a sharp, sober sense of finality settled in my bones. The hospital's patient portal processed the update instantly, a sterile gray confirmation popping across the screen, parental access updated. Sole authorized medical decision-maker, Laura McKinney. Secondary party privileges revoked indefinitely. I stood there for a long beat, staring at those words, letting them sink into every fractured part of me. For 7 years of marriage, I'd shared every responsibility, every choice, every fear side by side with Declan. But tonight, I'd learned the brutal truth: partnership only works when both people show up. He had abandoned that vow entirely, leaving me no choice but to protect my child alone. By the time I returned to the bustling ER waiting room, the pediatric triage nurse had finally prioritized Leo's critical vitals, cutting through the line of minor complaints to escort us back to a quiet, temperature-controlled exam bay. The small room smelled of fresh sanitizer and mild pediatric antiseptic, a stark contrast to the stale, anxious air out front. They carefully slid a tiny 4 catheter into my baby's fragile wrist, taping it down with soft, child-safe bandages to avoid irritation, and began administering slow, steady saline fluids to combat his severe dehydration. Within minutes, the worst of his labored gasping eased. His tight, tense little body relaxed against the padded hospital crib, his overheated skin cooling fractionally with the help of damp cooling cloths the nurse pressed to his forehead and neck. Though he remained deeply feverish and exhausted, the immediate life-threatening urgency softened enough for me to breathe again, yet the terror of what I'd just endured lingered. Thick and unshakable, I sank into the rigid plastic chair beside the crib, never taking my eyes off Leo's sleeping face, my fingers gently curling around his tiny, limp hand. The quiet of the exam bay amplified every chaotic thought racing through my mind. I replayed the night's events on a torturous loop, my frantic, shaking calls to Declan, my flood of desperate text updates detailing Leo's worsening condition, the photos of my son's flushed, Glassy-eyed face and cracked, parched lips. I'd begged him to drop everything, to rush to the ER, to choose his family in our darkest hour. Instead, he'd chosen a lie, a convenience, another woman's child. This was no innocent misjudgment. This was premeditated, selfish abandonment. And I could no longer hide behind excuses to preserve my perfect suburban marriage facade. It was nearly midnight when the exam room door clicked open, cutting through the low hum of medical equipment. Declan stepped inside, his dark work blazer still crisp but slightly askew, his styled hair ruffled like he'd hastily run a hand through it to compose himself before facing me. He'd clearly taken time to settle his features, smoothing away any trace of urgency or guilt to craft the familiar, remorseful mask he'd perfected over years of small lies and missed promises. He closed the door softly behind him, as if gentleness could erase the unforgivable choice he'd made only minutes earlier. And his voice dropped to a hushed, tender tone. The same one he used to soothe me after petty marital arguments. Baby, I am so sorry. You have no idea how badly I messed up tonight. I've been kicking myself every second since I walked in here and saw you two struggling alone. I didn't lift my gaze. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing my fresh grief, my shattered trust, the way my entire world had crumbled in a single ER waiting room. My eyes stayed locked on Leo's peaceful, sleeping form. On the thin clear foreline snaking from his wrist to the fluid bag hanging above the crib. On the faint, tender indentation the needle had left on his perfect skin. For years, I'd clung to every apology he'd offered, grasping at his empty words like a lifeline, desperate to fix every crack in our marriage. I'd forgiven missed anniversaries, late-night work absences, vague half-truths, and emotional distance, always telling myself that marriage required grace, that everyone made mistakes. But tonight's betrayal was far beyond a simple error in judgment. It was a complete, unrepentant rejection of his role as a father and a husband. Declan hesitated when I offered no response, no tears, no anger, no forgiveness. He took a small step forward, his hands lifted in a placating gesture, his expression shifting from gentle remorse to anxious desperation. He could feel the cold, uncrossable wall I'd built between us. And it terrified him, because for the first time, I was not going to fold, not going to console him. Not going to pretend everything would be fine. Lara, please talk to me. I know this looked horrific. I know you're hurt and furious, and you have every right to be. But you have to hear me out. Chloe texted me out of nowhere tonight, completely hysterical. She said Mason was having a violent allergic reaction, that he couldn't breathe, that she had no one else to turn to. I panicked. I thought her child was in immediate, life-threatening danger. I rushed to help her because I thought it was a true emergency. A bitter, humorless ache tightened in my chest, and I finally lifted my eyes to meet his. My stare was cold, unflinching, completely free of the warmth and softness he'd grown accustomed to over 7 years. Every word out of his mouth was a carefully constructed lie, designed to twist his selfish choice into a heroic, impulsive mistake. He wanted to be the good guy, the helpful, compassionate man who'd rushed to save a stranger's child, while ignoring the fact that his own son had been fighting for his life. You knew exactly how sick Leo was, I said. My voice quiet but razor sharp, no tremor of emotion to weaken my words. I called you 8 times. I texted you 12 updates. I sent you photos. I told you his fever hit 104 degrees. I told you he couldn't keep fluids down. I told you the nurse warned me about seizures. You read every single message, Declan. You saw every alert. You just didn't care enough to come. His jaw clenched hard, the muscle ticking violently beneath his skin, and for a split second, his mask slipped. The remorse vanished, replaced by raw, petty frustration, the same irritation he always felt when I refused to buy into his excuses. He quickly smoothed his expression again, reverting back to his performative guilt, but the crack in his facade told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't sorry for hurting me or endangering Leo. He was only sorry he'd gotten caught. I was split between 2 emergencies. He argued, his tone rising slightly before he forced it back down. I thought Leo's fever was a standard childhood virus, something we'd handled dozens of times before. I thought I could help Chloe fast and be right back here before you even needed extra support. I never intended to abandon my family. You have to believe that. I would never choose anyone over you or Leo. The words landed hollow and lifeless in the quiet exam room, echoing pointlessly against the walls. He kept repeating the word family like it was a magic spell that could erase his choices, like loyalty and love were empty buzzwords he could toss around without action. In that moment, I realized how thoroughly I'd deluded myself for years. I'd built my entire identity around being his wife, being Leo's mother, holding our suburban household together, while Declan had simply lived his own life alongside ours, never fully committed, never fully present. This isn't a one-time mistake, I told him flatly. This is who you are. You choose easy every single time. You choose the person who asks for less, who demands nothing, who doesn't require you to show up and sacrifice. You chose Chloe's peaceful, convenient emergency over your own son's life-threatening crisis. That isn't bad luck. That's your character. Declan's face paled significantly, his confident composure crumbling piece by piece. He'd expected me to cry, to scream, to argue, to fall apart so he could comfort me and sweep the night under the rug. He'd never expected me to dissect his betrayal so calmly, so clearly. With no room for manipulation, desperate to regain control of the conversation. He reached out to touch my arm, his fingers brushing lightly against my sleeve. I pulled away instantly, leaning back in my chair and creating a physical distance that mirrored the emotional chasm between us. There was no more intimacy, no more trust, no more willingness to let him soften the edge of his cruelty. "I'll fix this," he promised urgently, his voice growing shaky. "I'll cut all contact with Chloe tonight. I'll block her number, delete every message, end everything completely. This was the last time. Work has been overwhelming, I've been burnt out, I've made terrible choices, but I'm going to fix them. Just don't ruin our family over this. Don't take our son away from me." His plea was self-serving to its core. He wasn't begging for forgiveness because he loved us. He was begging because he didn't want to lose his perfect suburban life, his stable family reputation, his effortless fatherhood status that required none of the actual work of parenting. As I stared at his frantic, guilty face, a slow, creeping suspicion unfurled in my chest. If this was truly a random, one-time emergency, why was Chloe so quick to fabricate a crisis? Why was Declan so conditioned to drop everything for her? Why had I spent so many lonely nights alone while he claimed work stress, so many quiet afternoons wondering why our bank account always felt tighter than it should be? I stood slowly, brushing a stray curl off Leo's warm forehead, my fingers lingering gently against his still flushed skin as the weight of my phone's notification sank into me. The quiet hospital room no longer felt like a safe space, it felt like a stage where I'd been playing the naive, oblivious wife for years, while Declan performed a double life right behind my back. The single bank alert on my screen was no longer just a random transaction. It was proof. Proof of months of secrecy, of quiet financial betrayal, of a husband who'd been siphoning away our family's security to fuel his hidden affair. I kept my face calm, refusing to let Declan see the volcanic dread and fury building inside me. Because I knew better than to show my cards before I had the full truth. Beside me, Declan was still simmering with indignation. His earlier remorse completely replaced by petty anger and victimhood. He paced the small exam bay quietly, his dress shoes tapping softly against the linoleum floor, his jaw tight and brows furrowed like he was the one who'd been wronged tonight. He kept shooting sharp, bitter glances my way. Clearly offended that I'd stripped him of his medical guardianship. That I'd refused to melt into his empty apologies. That I'd finally stopped letting him get away with everything. In his warped perspective, I was the cruel, unreasonable spouse for ruining his perfect reputation and his easy, balanced life, not the man who'd abandoned his dying child. "You're being irrational," he muttered under his breath, crossing his arms over his chest, his tone sharp and defensive. "You revoked my parental access in a fit of anger, you're blowing one terrible night completely out of proportion, and now you're acting like I'm some kind of monster. This is exactly why I hate fighting with you, you never let me fix my mistakes." I didn't bother glancing up from my phone. My thumb hovered over the banking app, my heart thudding hard and fast in my chest as I worked to unlock the full transaction history I'd never once dared to audit. For 7 years, I'd trusted Declan entirely with our family finances. I'd handled the household chores, the childcare, the endless small responsibilities of running a home, while letting him manage our checking account, our savings, and Leo's dedicated childhood education fund. I'd believed he was careful, responsible, focused on building our future. I'd never suspected he was using our family's money to build a separate life for his mistress and her child. "This isn't anger," I said flatly, my voice steady and cold, lacking any trace of the emotion he was used to manipulating. "This is protection. Something you clearly don't know how to do anymore." Declan let out a frustrated huff, running a hand roughly through his ruffled hair, his patience wearing thin. "I already told you I'm ending things with Chloe. I'm cutting all contact, I'm fixing this. What more do you want from me? Do you want to destroy our marriage entirely over a single panicked decision?" I finally lifted my eyes to meet his, my gaze sharp and unyielding. "I want the truth. All of it. And I'm finally going to find it myself, since you've spent months lying to my face." His expression flickered, a split second of raw panic flashing across his features before he masked it with annoyance. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible reaction, but it confirmed every suspicion blooming in my chest. He wasn't just hiding a one-night mistake. He was hiding a long-term pattern of deceit, and he was terrified I was finally about to uncover it. I turned my attention back to my phone, my thumb scrolling steadily through months and months of buried bank data. I'd always ignored the small, random outgoing transfers before, chalking them up to work expenses, client dinners, gas, or miscellaneous office costs that I'd never needed to question. Declan always brushed off my casual questions about finances with vague answers, telling me not to stress about the boring logistics, promising he had everything under control. I'd believed him. I'd trusted him blindly, and now I was paying the price for that misplaced faith. But tonight, every blurred, unlabeled transaction lined up perfectly, forming a devastating pattern I could no longer ignore. 17 separate transfers in total, stretching back 6 full months. Each amount was different, some small $100 withdrawals, some larger $400 deposits, all sent to the same unregistered external account, all processed on random weekdays and weekends, all hidden in plain sight within our family banking history. No work notes, no receipts, no explanations. Just steady, consistent payments flowing out of our family's accounts and straight to someone else. My breath caught in my throat as I kept scrolling, my hands finally trembling again, not from fear for Leo's fever, but from the sickening realization of how thoroughly I'd been betrayed. Every late night at the office, every cancelled family dinner, every vague excuse about work stress now made terrible, perfect sense. He hadn't been busy building our family's future. He'd been busy funding another woman's lifestyle. Worse was yet to come. As I toggled over to Leo's dedicated 529 education savings account, the fund we'd opened the day he was born, the money we'd slowly set aside month after month for his future college tuition, his childhood opportunities, his safety net, I felt my stomach drop out entirely. I'd always checked the balance casually, seeing the overall number rise, never digging into the individual withdrawal history. I'd assumed it was untouched, sacred, reserved solely for our son's future. I was wrong. Multiple unauthorized withdrawals had been drained directly from Leo's education fund, siphoned out bit by bit over the past 4 months. Small enough to avoid triggering major bank alerts, frequent enough to add up to a devastating total. Declan had stolen our infant son's future savings to pay for Chloe's groceries, her rent, her random personal expenses, all while I'd stayed home, sacrificing my career growth and personal income to raise our child and maintain our household. What are you scrolling through over there? Declan asked, his voice tight and forced casual, taking a step closer to peer at my screen. His attempt to sound unbothered was transparent. I could hear the quiet anxiety creeping into his tone. I locked my phone instantly, shielding the screen from his view, not allowing him the chance to delete evidence or talk me down from what I'd found. Nothing you're willing to be honest about. He scowled, growing more agitated by the second. You're being ridiculous. You're digging up old transactions to manufacture drama, Lara. That's not fair, and it's not healthy for us or for Leo. The word fair almost made me laugh out loud, bitter and broken. Fair was sitting alone in an ER with a dying baby while your husband lied and prioritized his mistress. Fair was saving every penny for your child's future while your spouse stole it to pamper another woman. Fair was 7 years of loyalty, compromise, and sacrifice met with endless lies and betrayal. Before I could respond, my eyes caught one final, damning piece of evidence buried at the bottom of my email inbox, a scanned PDF attachment Declan had never bothered to hide properly, sent to his work email and CC'd to our shared family address by mistake. It was a private school enrollment contract, pre-signed and fully dated. The student name listed was Mason Hale. The tuition payment plan was linked directly to our joint family checking account. My blood turned ice cold. Declan hadn't just been sending Chloe spare cash. He hadn't just been wasting small sums of our family money. He'd formally committed to paying for her son's private school tuition, locking us into thousands of dollars in future monthly payments, all behind my back. All while pretending to be a devoted husband and father saving for his own child's future. I lifted my gaze to Declan, my eyes glistening not with grief, but with razor-sharp, unbreakable resolve. The naive, forgiving wife who'd spent years making excuses for him was completely gone. In her place was a mother who knew exactly what she needed to do to protect her child. You didn't just choose Chloe tonight, I whispered, my voice low and deadly calm. You've been choosing her for months. You've been choosing her over our son, over our future, over every vow you ever made to me. And I'm never letting you get away with it again. Declan's face blanched white, all his anger vanishing in an instant, replaced by pure, unmasked terror. He knew I'd found something irreversible, something that would destroy every last lie he'd built his double life upon, and worst of all, I knew this was only the beginning. Somewhere on his phone, hidden between his lies and empty apologies, there was proof that Chloe's ER emergency had never been real at all. Proof that he'd knowingly abandoned his dying child for a deliberate, calculated lie. Declan's face blanched the second the words left my mouth, all his manufactured anger crumbling into raw, unmasked panic. For months, he'd hidden behind half-truths, vague excuses, and my own willingness to overlook red flags. He'd grown comfortable living a double life, convinced I would never dig deep enough, never question his financial control, never dare to dismantle the perfect suburban facade we'd built. But in that quiet hospital exam room, with my feverish son sleeping safely beside us, I'd stripped away every single one of his lies. For the first time all night, he had no defense, no manipulation, no way to twist his selfish choices into a harmless mistake. He recovered fast, though, slipping back into the defensive, victimized tone he'd mastered over years of conflict. His shoulders squared, his jaw tightened, and he leaned forward like he was about to deliver a carefully rehearsed rebuttal, determined to shift the blame back onto me. "You're blowing this completely out of proportion, Lara. Those transfers were nothing but occasional favors. Chloe was going through a hard patch financially, and I helped her out a few times. That's it. There's no affair, no secret life, no grand betrayal you're cooking up in your head." I stared at him in quiet disbelief, stunned by the audacity of his denial. After everything I'd witnessed tonight, after he'd abandoned our dying infant to prioritize her child, after I'd uncovered months of hidden payments, after I'd found a signed private school tuition contract for her son, he still thought he could lie his way out of the truth. He truly believed I was still the gullible, forgiving wife who would accept his flimsy excuses and sweep his betrayal under the rug for the sake of our marriage. Occasional favors? I repeated flatly, my voice cold and unshaken. 17 hidden transfers, 4 months of stolen education fund withdrawals, and a legally binding tuition contract for her child is not a few favors, Declan. That's a consistent, long-term commitment you made to another family, behind my back. At the cost of our son's future. He threw his hands up in frustration, his voice rising sharp and loud enough to make me glance quickly at Leo, terrified of waking my fragile, sleeping baby. I shot him a warning look, and he lowered his tone, but his irritation only simmered hotter beneath the surface. I was being a decent human being. She's a single mom struggling to get by, and I helped. You always talk about kindness and empathy, but the second it inconveniences you, you turn cruel and accusatory. I can't win with you. That sentence sliced through every last thread of lingering doubt I'd held on to. This was never about kindness, never about helping a struggling friend. This was about his ego, his need to feel needed by another woman, his willingness to sacrifice his own family's security to fuel his secret selfish life. He was actively painting me as the unreasonable, unforgiving spouse for uncovering his theft and deception, twisting my maternal protection into petty resentment. "Don't you dare frame this as kindness," I said, my tone low and lethal. "Kindness doesn't require secrecy. Kindness doesn't steal from your child's college fund. Kindness doesn't leave your sick infant in an emergency room to prioritize someone else's kid. You weren't being generous. You were being disloyal, and you've been getting away with it for far too long." Declan's expression turned icy, his fake remorse fully gone, replaced by resentment and stubborn pride. He leaned against the wall of the exam bay, crossing his arms tightly over his chest, his posture rigid and defensive. "This is exactly why I keep things private. You overreact to everything. You can't separate emotion from logic. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd spiral like this. Turn small acts of help into some huge cheating scandal that ruins our entire life." His gaslighting was seamless, practiced from years of quiet manipulation. He was trying to make me feel irrational, unbalanced, overly sensitive for holding him accountable for his own choices. For a split second, an old familiar doubt flickered in the back of my mind, the voice I'd lived with for 7 years. The one that told me I was too dramatic, too untrusting, too quick to ruin our perfect life. But then I glanced down at Leo's tiny fore-wrapped wrist, at his still flushed cheeks, at the evidence scattered across my phone screen, and the doubt vanished entirely. I was not overreacting. I was finally seeing clearly. Tired of his endless lies and blame-shifting, I turned back to my phone, determined to gather every last piece of evidence before I confronted him further. I knew he was hiding something far worse than financial theft. The ER incident had been deliberate, calculated, a choice he'd made with full knowledge of Leo's critical condition. I needed proof of exactly why he'd chosen Chloe's child over ours. Proof that would crush every last one of his excuses. I navigated to the cloud backup link to Declan's phone. A feature we'd set up years ago for family photo storage, one he'd long forgotten about. He'd always been careless with digital traces, confident I'd never bother digging through old files and message logs. My fingers moved steady and sure as I scrolled through cached text messages, skipping past trivial work chats and old family conversations, searching for any thread between him and Chloe. It didn't take long to find it. A hidden message thread, dated the exact night of Leo's ER crisis, timestamps lining up perfectly with my frantic calls and texts. My breath stalled in my chest as I read Chloe's unfiltered, unashamed confession, typed mere minutes before Declan abandoned me at the hospital. I told the triage nurse Mason's having a bad allergy. He's totally fine, just fussy and tired. But allergy symptoms get priority fast, way faster than a regular fever. Come get us quick so we don't have to wait hours. The words burned into my vision, sharp and unforgiving, stripping away every last excuse Declan had clung to. There was no emergency, no panicked crisis, no split-second decision born of confusion. Chloe had deliberately lied to hospital staff to skip the ER waiting line. She'd weaponized her healthy child for convenience. And Declan had known it. He'd read that text. He'd understood exactly what he was doing when he rushed to register Mason ahead of his own dying son. He hadn't made a mistake. He'd followed a deliberate, selfish plan. I stared at the screen for a long, frozen moment, every ounce of grief hardening into unbreakable resolve. All his apologies, all his excuses, all his claims of a one-time lapse in judgment were complete fabrications. He'd chosen Chloe's convenience over Leo's life with full, intentional awareness. He'd watched me suffer alone, watched our baby deteriorate, and never hesitated in his choice. When I finally lifted my head to face him, my eyes were cold, empty, completely free of the love and softness that had defined our marriage for 7 years. Declan must have seen the irreversible shift in my expression, because his confident defensive posture faltered. He pushed off the wall, taking a small step toward me, his tone suddenly desperate and uncertain. Lara, seriously, let's talk this through calmly. We can fix the finances, I'll cut all contact with Chloe, we can go back to normal. There is no normal anymore. I cut him off, my voice quiet but final. I locked my phone, tucking it securely in my pocket, the damning text evidence safely stored, unerasable. You knew Mason was fine. You knew Chloe lied for faster service. And you still chose them over us. Declan's face went deathly pale. All color drained from his skin, his lips parting in silent shock. He knew, in that instant, that I had found the ultimate proof. The lie he'd clung to all night, the story he'd built his defense around, was completely shattered. Instead of apologizing or begging for forgiveness, he shifted instantly into damage control mode, his tone turning sharp and calculating. You've been snooping through my private messages? That's invasion of privacy, Lara. That's illegal. You can't use that against me. I let out a bitter, hollow laugh. You steal from your child's savings, lie to hospital staff, abandon your dying son, and you're upset I found the truth? Your priorities have never been more clear. Cornered and out of excuses, Declan's true nature finally surfaced. He dropped all pretense of remorse, his expression hardening into pure resentment. You're never going to let this go, are you? You're just waiting to ruin my life, to take my son away, to punish me for one stupid choice. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated again. This time with a formal text from our family attorney, a consultation reply I'd requested hours earlier. In the quiet gaps between comforting Leo and uncovering evidence, my blood ran cold as I read the short, blunt message on the screen. The evidence you've gathered is solid. But Declan's legal team is already moving forward. They plan to allege parental instability and fight for joint custody. In that crushing moment, I realized I was no longer just fighting to protect my son from a disloyal father. I was about to be dragged into a brutal, high-stakes custody battle. Declan wasn't just sorry for his betrayal. He was prepared to lie in court, to smear my character, to weaponize the legal system to keep his double life intact. The worst part? He was already one step ahead of me. The attorney's text burned bright in my pocket, quiet and devastating, rewriting every rule I'd thought applied to this fight. I'd spent the entire night believing the truth alone would be enough to hold Declan accountable. I'd assumed that a father who abandoned his critically ill infant, who stole from his child's savings, who funded another woman's life behind his family's back would have no ground to stand on in court. But reality was far colder. In family court, truth didn't always win, evidence, documentation, and preparedness did. And Declan was already building his defense before I'd even finished gathering my case. I locked my screen slowly, my fingers steady despite the adrenaline thrumming beneath my skin. Beside me in the dim exam bay, Leo slept soundly now, his fever stabilized by 4 fluids, his small chest rising and falling in soft, even rhythm. The worst of his medical crisis had passed, but ours was only beginning. For the first time all night, I understood this was no longer a marital argument, no longer a moment of hurt or betrayal I could walk away from. This was a high-stakes legal battle for sole custody, for financial justice, for the right to protect my son from a father who valued his own secrets over Leo's safety and future. Declan watched me closely. His eyes sharp and suspicious, picking up on the subtle shift in my demeanor. He'd spent hours trying to rattle me, to make me emotional and irrational, to force me into a fight he could twist and spin to his advantage. But after the attorney's warning, I refused to give him a single reaction. No cheers, no anger, no desperatio. I was no longer a hurt wife. I was a plaintiff building her case. What are you looking at? He snapped, unable to stand my silence. More accusations? More digging for something to ruin me with? I lifted my gaze, neutral and unreadable. I'm documenting everything. Every transfer, every lie, every choice you made tonight. I'm building a full record. His face darkened, panic flaring into outright hostility. That's ridiculous. You're turning a stupid marital fight into a legal war over nothing. Laura, grow up. We can fix this if you stop trying to destroy me. There is nothing to fix, I replied evenly. You already broke everything the second you chose deception over your family. Without another word to him, I turned my full attention to my phone, methodically organizing every piece of proof I'd uncovered, stacking them into an unbreakable chain that would leave no room for his lies in court. I started with the financial records, exporting 6 months of bank statements line by line, capturing all 17 undisclosed transfers to Chloe's anonymous account. I labeled each transaction with its date, amount, and purpose I could now clearly trace: grocery payments, utility assistance, casual cash handouts, small luxury purchases for her and her household. Every single dollar came from our joint family income, money we were supposed to save for rent, household bills, and Leo's care next. I pulled the full 529 education fund history, my chest tightening as I confirmed 4 months of incremental withdrawals Declan had deliberately hidden from me. He'd siphoned small sums each month, never large enough to trigger immediate suspicion, but steady enough to drain thousands from Leo's college savings, funds we'd promised our son would belong only to him, reserved for his education, his future, his freedom. Declan had stolen a child's security net to pamper his mistress, and he'd done it calmly, calculatingly. Without a single moment of guilt. I saved the private school tuition contract as a separate high-resolution PDF, highlighting the signature date, the student name Mason Hale, and the recurring monthly payment schedule linked directly to our checking account. The document was damning legal proof that his support of Chloe was not temporary, not charitable, not impulsive. It was a long-term, contractual commitment he'd entered while still married to me, while raising our infant son last, and most lethal of all. I screenshotted Chloe's text message confession, preserving the timestamp, the context, and the unashamed admission that she'd fabricated a medical emergency solely to skip the ER waiting line. I cross-referenced the timestamp with my own call and text history, proving beyond doubt that Declan had received my frantic updates about Leo's life-threatening fever before he'd rushed to help Chloe and her healthy child. The timeline was ironclad. He had known exactly what he was abandoning. He had chosen deliberately. As I filed each piece of evidence into a labeled folder on my cloud drive, I realized how masterfully Declan had manipulated me for months. He'd controlled all our finances, insisted handling money was his job, gently discouraged me from checking accounts, told me I had enough on my plate with the baby. He'd lulled me into complacency while building an entire secret life funded by our family's future. Every late night, every vague work excuse, every distant mood now lined up perfectly into one unbroken pattern of betrayal. Declan watched me working, growing increasingly agitated as he realized I was no longer engaging with his arguments. He stepped forward, reaching for my phone, his movement quick and aggressive. "Give me that. You're not saving any of that garbage." I stepped back instantly, locking my device and tucking it securely behind my body, my posture firm and unyielding. "Don't touch my phone. Don't touch my evidence. Don't touch anything that belongs to my son and me." The sharp boundary stopped him cold. He stared at me, stunned by how completely I'd shifted. The woman who once bent to keep the peace was gone. In her place stood someone who would never surrender again. "This is harassment," he growled, desperate to regain control. "You're fabricating a case against me to punish me. I will fight you for joint custody. I will fight you for everything." His threat didn't scare me. It clarified everything. This man was willing to drag his infant son into a bitter court battle, willing to lie under oath, willing to paint me as an unstable mother, all to protect his secret affair and his selfish lifestyle. I lifted my chin, my voice steady and final. "Fight all you want. Every lie you tell in court will only add to the record. Every excuse you make will be cross-examined against proof. I have everything." I submitted the entire evidence packet to my attorney that same night, completing the formal case filing that would officially launch our litigation. The second the upload finished, the hospital pediatrician returned to the room with Leo's updated vitals, confirming his fever was broken, his hydration restored, and he was stable enough for discharge. Relief washed over me, warm and pure. My baby was safe, but as I gathered Leo's tiny blanket and lifted him gently into my arms, Declan's phone buzzed once in his pocket, quiet but impossible to miss. He froze instantly, his eyes darting nervously to the device before he forced a neutral expression. I didn't need to see the screen to know who it was. Chloe wasn't done interfering in our lives. And as I prepared to leave the hospital with my son, I realized her next move was already on its way, one final, cruel play that would push our case from complicated to completely unforgivable. The day of the custody hearing arrived cold and gray, a Seattle winter morning that matched the quiet, unshakable resolve settling deep in my bones. In the weeks between Leo's ER nightmare and this courtroom showdown, I'd not once let my guard down. I'd moved myself and my recovering baby into temporary housing, cut off all one-on-one contact with Declan, and worked tirelessly with my attorney to polish every thread of my evidence chain. No longer was I the grief-stricken wife reeling from betrayal. I was a mother fighting tooth and nail to protect my child. And I'd come prepared to when Declan walked into the courtroom like he still owned the place. Dressed in a tailored suit, his hair neatly styled, his demeanor calm and rehearsed. He'd spent weeks crafting his perfect innocent facade, charming, remorseful, painted as a hardworking father unfairly targeted by a bitter, overreacting ex-wife. Beside him sat his high-priced defense attorney, poised and ready to paint me as an unstable, vengeful woman willing to destroy a family over a single misjudgment. Chloe was absent, hidden away from public scrutiny, letting Declan fight the legal battle to preserve their secret life while she remained untouched. As we settled at opposing counsel tables, I caught Declan's eye. He didn't look remorseful. He looked calculating, confident that his wealth, his reputation, and his polished lies would override the messy, unglamorous truth of what he'd done. He'd spent weeks spreading subtle rumors to mutual friends, framing me as irrational and unforgiving, convincing himself that the court would side with the stable, successful father over the grieving, protective mother. The judge called the court to order, her tone steady, impartial, and firm. The room fell silent, every rustle of paper, every quiet breath amplified in the tense stillness. This was the moment every choice, every lie, every hidden betrayal would finally be dragged into the light. Declan's attorney opened first, delivering a sleek, polished argument designed to manipulate the court's sympathy. He painted Declan as a devoted family man, overwhelmed by work stress, guilty of a single impulsive mistake on a chaotic night, and unfairly villainized by a wife refusing to grant grace. Mr. McKinney's only error was acting out of compassion for a struggling single mother, the defense attorney claimed smoothly. He has always been a present, loving father to his infant son. This entire case is a retaliatory power grab, fueled by Mrs. McKinney's unchecked anger and inability to forgive a minor, human mistake. My blood ran cold at the blatant rewrite of history. They were framing abandoning a dying infant as a minor mistake, framing deliberate financial theft as compassionate generosity, framing my maternal protection as vengeful cruelty. Declan sat straight-faced beside his lawyer, nodding solemnly, feigning quiet regret while letting his team lie relentlessly on his behalf. He had no shame, no remorse, only a desperate hunger to protect his reputation and his double life. When my attorney stepped forward, she wasted no time dismantling their fake narrative piece by piece, laying my ironclad evidence chain before the court. First came the bank records, blown up and displayed clearly for the judge to see, 17 hidden transfers stretching 6 months, consistent, unacknowledged payments funneled straight to Chloe's account. The defense tried to argue they were casual favors, but my attorney quickly dismantled the claim, highlighting the regularity, the secrecy, and the timing of every transaction, all occurring during late nights Declan claimed to be working, all hidden from our family's shared financial logs. Next, she presented the 529 education fund records, the damning proof that Declan had systematically siphoned thousands from Leo's dedicated childhood savings. The judge's expression shifted, growing stern and unyielding as she reviewed the incremental, deliberate withdrawals. There was no accidental overspending, no one-time error, only calculated, repeated theft from a child's future security. The defense's argument of minor mistakes crumbled further with every line item on the statement. The private school tuition contract landed like a bombshell in the courtroom. My attorney emphasized the signed, legal commitment Declan had made to fund Mason's education long-term, proving his support for Chloe was never temporary or charitable. This was a premeditated, ongoing financial commitment to another family, made while he was legally obligated to provide for his own wife and infant son. The room stirred faintly, the fake compassion of Declan's narrative completely unraveling, but the final, fatal blow was Chloe's text confession. My attorney displayed the timestamped message prominently, cross-referencing it with my frantic call and text logs from the ER night. She laid out the unshakable timeline for the court. I had alerted Declan to Leo's life-threatening 104 degrees Fahrenheit fever and severe dehydration repeatedly. Minutes later, Chloe texted Declan admitting she was faking an allergic reaction to skip the ER line. Declan read that confession, understood fully that Mason was healthy and safe, and still chose to abandon his dying infant son to prioritize his mistress's convenience. This was not compassion, my attorney stated firmly. This was deliberate, knowing abandonment. A father chose a fraudulent emergency for his mistress's healthy child over the critical, life-threatening emergency of his own son. And he financially defrauded his child's savings to sustain that secret relationship for months. Declan's composure shattered instantly. His calm, remorseful facade melted away, replaced by raw, unmasked panic. He leaned over to his attorney, whispering frantically, his face flushing red with humiliation and fear as the full weight of his actions was laid bare for the court. All his careful lies, all his rehearsed denials, all his attempts to paint me as unstable were completely destroyed by irrefutable proof. The defense attempted a last-ditch Hail Mary, arguing the text was taken out of context, that the financial transfers were trivial, that Declan's judgment was simply clouded in a chaotic moment. But the judge had seen enough. Her tone was sharp, authoritative, and final as she cut through the pointless arguments. No longer willing to entertain his endless excuses, a parent's highest legal and moral duty is to the safety and well-being of their minor child, she ruled firmly. The court finds Mr. McKinney's actions premeditated, negligent, and financially reckless. He knowingly prioritized a third party over his critically ill infant, depleted his child's educational savings to sustain a secret relationship, and attempted to manipulate this court with false narratives of compassion and innocence. The verdict landed unwavering and absolute. I was granted full sole legal and physical custody of Leo, with complete authority over all medical, educational, and life decisions. Declan was formally stripped of all emergency hospital access rights, permanently barred from making any medical choices for our son. His visitation rights were reduced to one supervised, monthly hour-long visit, with 0 unsupervised contact allowed. Most importantly, the court issued a formal no-contact order mandating Chloe stay permanently away from Leo, forbidding her from any proximity or interaction with my child. On top of full custody, I was awarded complete marital property division, including full reimbursement of all stolen education funds and every dollar wrongfully transferred to Chloe. Declan's carefully built double life was legally, financially, and permanently destroyed. His reputation, his secret relationship, his illusion of perfect fatherhood, all of it crumbled to dust in that courtroom. As the judge closed the case, the weight of months of fear, pain, and fighting lifted from my shoulders. I'd won. Not out of vengeance, but out of pure, unyielding maternal love. I'd protected my son from the father who'd failed him utterly. Court adjourned, and the room emptied quickly. Before I could gather my documents and leave, Declan crossed the room to me, his tough, defensive demeanor completely gone. His eyes were red, his shoulders slumped, his pride shattered. For the first time ever, he looked truly broken. No more lies, no more excuses, no more manipulation. He spoke in a quiet, hoarse whisper, stripped of all pretense, a genuine apology finally falling from his lips. I'm so sorry, Lara. I messed up everything. I lost you. I lost Leo. I lost my entire life, and I have no one to blame but myself. I stared at him calmly, no anger, no grief, no regret. His apology was real, but it was far too late to fix the irreversible damage he'd done, and as I turned and walked away from him for good, I knew one final truth: a sincere apology could never erase a lifetime of broken choices. The last chapter of our old life was closed for good, but my new life with Leo was only just beginning. The crisp Seattle wind hit my face the second I stepped out of the courthouse, carrying with it a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. I clutched Leo's warm, sleeping body tight against my chest, his small head tucked safely into the crook of my neck, his soft breath steady and calm against my collarbone. After months of sleepless nights, crippling anxiety, endless evidence gathering, and brutal legal warfare, the fight was finally over. The judge's ruling was final, ironclad, and unappealable. Declan had lost everything, and my son and I were finally free from his lies, his betrayal, and his reckless choices. For the first time since that terrifying night, I allowed myself to breathe deeply, to relax the constant guard I'd held up for so long. I'd spent so long preparing for the worst, bracing myself for a devastating custody loss, for endless legal battles, for the possibility of losing partial control over my son's safety and future. But the court had seen the truth clearly. They'd recognized Declan's deliberate negligence, his financial fraud, his selfish abandonment of his critically ill child. I'd been granted full, unshakable custody, complete legal authority, and full financial restitution for every dollar he'd stolen from Leo's future. The toxic double life he'd spent months building had crumbled completely, and Chloe was legally barred from ever coming near my child again. In every way that mattered, we'd won. I settled Leo into his car seat gently, brushing a stray curl off his forehead and double-checking every strap until it was secure. The winter sunlight filtered weakly through the car windows, gilding his peaceful sleeping face, and my heart swelled with a quiet, overwhelming gratitude. All the pain, all the tears, all the lonely nights spent fighting alone had been worth it to protect this perfect, innocent little boy. I slid into the driver's seat, closed the door softly, and finally let the tension drain from my shoulders. I'd assumed this was the end of our nightmare, the final closing of a terrible chapter that had nearly broken our family. I couldn't have been more wrong. For the next 3 weeks, life settled into a quiet, gentle peace I'd almost forgotten was possible. I moved us into a bright, cozy small home in a safe, quiet neighborhood, far from the suburban house we'd shared with Declan and all its painful memories. I redecorated every room with warm, soft colors, filled the space with new toys for Leo, and built a calm, stable routine for my recovering baby. Leo's health improved exponentially each day. His fever was long gone, his energy returned, his laughter filling the quiet rooms and healing every scar left from that horrific night. We spent our days walking in the neighborhood park, reading books, and enjoying the simple, uncomplicated happiness of just being together, safe and unharmed. Declan stayed completely out of sight. He honored the supervised visitation ban entirely, sending no texts, making no calls, attempting no contact. I'd heard through distant mutual friends that his reputation had collapsed entirely within our old social circle. His real estate clients had dropped him one by one after rumors of his fraud and affair spread, his business drying up almost overnight. He'd lost his home, his status, his career momentum, and his family, all in one brutal courtroom ruling. A small, selfish part of me felt relief that he was facing the consequences of his endless choices, but mostly, I just felt peace. I was finally free to focus solely on Leo, on healing, on building our new life from the ground up. I'd fully believed Declan's defeat would end the chaos. I thought Chloe's no-contact order would keep her far away from us for good. I assumed all the lies, the secrecy, the hidden manipulation were buried with the court verdict. But the universe had one last devastating secret left to uncover, a final piece of the puzzle that changed everything I thought I knew about that terrible night. And about the man I'd married. It started with a simple, anonymous email that landed in my inbox late one rainy Tuesday evening. The subject line was blank, no sender name, no return address. Just a single cryptic sentence that made my blood run cold. You don't know the whole story about Declan and the ER. There's a witness. My fingers froze hovering over my keyboard. Every muscle in my body tensing instantly. For 3 weeks, I'd lived in complete calm, convinced every truth had been laid bare in court. But this message carried a weight of quiet certainty, a hidden knowledge that sent old fear flaring back to life. I hesitated only a second before clicking open the message. My heart thudding hard and fast in my chest. The body of the email contained no long explanation. No dramatic rant, just 3 attached files, a short video clip, a time-stamped audio recording, and a blurred photo taken inside the ER waiting room the night Leo was hospitalized. My breath caught painfully in my throat as I pressed play on the video first. My eyes locked unblinkingly on the screen. The footage was grainy, captured from a hidden lobby security camera angle I'd never noticed that night, but every face was unmistakable. It showed Declan walking into the ER with Chloe and Mason, exactly as I'd remembered. But what happened next rewrote every detail of that night's betrayal. Seconds after stepping through the automatic doors, long before he'd walked to the triage desk, Declan had leaned down to whisper directly into Chloe's ear. His expression was cold, calculated, completely devoid of the panicked compassion he'd claimed in court. The paired audio clip cleared up every remaining doubt. Capturing his quiet, commanding words perfectly. Stick to the allergy story. Make it sound urgent. We need to get seen first, no exceptions. Her kid's fever is just routine, he'll be fine waiting. I sat frozen in my chair, stunned and sickened as the full truth slammed into me. Chloe hadn't come up with the fake emergency on her own. She hadn't panicked spontaneously and fabricated a story to skip the line. Declan had ordered her to lie. He'd orchestrated the entire fraudulent emergency from the second he left our home. He'd known Leo was dying. He'd known our son needed immediate, urgent medical care. And he'd deliberately instructed his mistress to fake a crisis so he could prioritize their convenience over his own child's life. The blurred photo attached to the email confirmed every word, capturing the exact moment he'd given the cruel instruction. His face hard and unyielding, no remorse, no hesitation. The anonymous sender added one final, short line at the bottom of the email, a revelation that shattered my newfound peace entirely. I worked triage that night. I heard everything. He didn't just choose them. He planned it. A hospital staff witness. A real, credible insider who'd seen and heard Declan's calculated manipulation firsthand. Someone who'd stayed silent through the entire custody trial. Who'd watched me fight alone with partial evidence. Who'd waited weeks after the verdict to reveal the full, unvarnished truth. Tears burned hot and sharp in my eyes, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of cold, brutal realization. All this time, I'd thought Declan's betrayal had been a spontaneous, terrible choice made in a moment of poor judgment. I'd thought it was a reckless lapse, a selfish mistake he'd made on impulse. But it was far worse. It was premeditated, cold-hearted, intentional cruelty. He'd left our sick child at home knowing exactly what he was doing. He'd built the lie, directed the fraud. And abandon Leo by choice, with full forethought and zero regret, before I could process the full weight of this new evidence. My phone rang suddenly, cutting through the quiet room. It was my attorney, her tone urgent and tight the second I answered. No greeting, no preamble. Lara, we have an emergency, she said quickly. Declan's legal team just filed a motion for modified visitation. He's claiming full court rehabilitation, arguing he's completed anger management and parenting classes. And he's requesting unsupervised overnight visits with Leo starting next week. My blood turned to ice. After everything he'd done, after the deliberate abandonment, the financial theft, the orchestrated lies, he was still trying to worm his way back into my son's life. But this time, I wasn't just fighting to protect Leo from a reckless father. I was fighting to keep a cold, calculating, premeditated liar away from my child for good, and as I stared back at the damning video and audio proof on my screen, I knew the second battle was only just beginning, one far deadlier and more final than the last.